All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is where you're calling in from. Already seeing folks coming on in. Thanks so much for being here. While you're getting settled in the chat, getting settled here in the chat, feel free to drop your name and where you're calling in from. Remember to click the little three dots and make sure that you're talking to everybody. Adjust that setting. But again, as you're coming on in, feel free to drop your name, where you're calling in from, so we get to know you all a little bit more. But welcome to today's webinar, Transformative Best Practices in Law Enforcement Mentoring. Really happy to be here with you today and to learn more about this important topic. So I'll give folks another 30 seconds or so to join on in before we get started. Again, welcome on in. Perfect. Thanks, Lauren, for kicking us off. Lauren from North Carolina. We got Chicago representation. Oh, here we go. Lots of Florida representation I'm seeing. Amazing, amazing. Awesome. Again, big welcome on in, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We got Wisconsin, Maine, California. We're covering all corners of the country. I'd love to see it. New Mexico, Michigan. Awesome. Perfect. All right. Again, welcome on in, folks. If you are here for Transformative Best Practices in Law Enforcement Mentoring, you are in the right place. My name is Jake Sullivan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the training delivery manager with Mentor National. Really excited for today's conversation. We'll get started in just another few seconds to let more folks join. Awesome. I'm seeing Atlanta, Florida, Virginia. Perfect. All right. So just so that we can get straight to the content today, I'll kick us off with just some introductory slides, sharing a little bit about the National Mentoring Resource Center and our partnership with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. This whole project, which I'll get into the specifics of what the NMRC does in just a moment, is funded through a cooperative agreement from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, otherwise known as OJDDP, Office of Justice Programs in the U.S. Department of Justice. And then getting into what we actually do at the National Mentoring Resource Center. There are sort of three key components to the NMRC. The first being our website, which you can find just about everything, including this webinar recording after we're done today, along with any other resources that we share on that website. There's also a blog. There's numerous research-based resources and other evidence reviews on all different types of programs, models, and populations. We'll share one specific today's call at the end of the webinar, a whole guide on law enforcement mentoring that we partnered with a few different groups to put together. We also have the research board, a team made up of, at this point, dozens of folks from across the world doing really innovative research in all different areas of mentoring and youth development. And then there's also training and technical assistance that you can request at no cost for your mentoring program. So again, that's reaching across the country, and you can reach out for anything from assistance with recruitment, assistance with developing a logic model, etc. So very, very great resource. Make sure to check that out as well after the webinar. Before I move on, I do want to launch a couple polls, again, just so we get to know all of you a little bit more. I think actually maybe, yes, that's perfect. So before I get into these details, in a moment, you'll see the polls pop up on your screen. The first one is asking a little bit about your years of experience in the mentoring field, just so our panelists know kind of how basic do we need to get to in today's conversation, or what things maybe need definitions versus others. So in a moment, you should see a poll pop up on your screen titled Years of Experience. And so this is asking, how many years of experience do you have in the youth development or mentoring field? Give everybody a few seconds to answer that. Thanks for those who are introducing yourselves in the chat. Continue to use that throughout today's conversation to let us know your ideas and let us know your thoughts. Perfect. Almost everybody's gotten their answers in. I'll end the poll now and then share the results. So again, you should be able to see the makeup of today's room. Really cool to see so many folks in the room with us that have 11 or more years of experience in the mentoring field. But then even if you're at that 0 to 1 or 2 to 4 years of experience level, all of your ideas are valid. Definitely bring that experience and bring that perspective into today's conversation. All of those different backgrounds are important. So thanks for being here regardless. And then I have one other poll to share with you all, I believe. Yes. So the next one is, what is your role in the mentoring field? And again, you could say mentoring or youth development field. I know a lot of us wear many hats. So pick whatever one you're feeling like today, whatever feels like it's resonating with you the most today. And we'll go from there. Take another couple seconds to answer that. Quick. You didn't get a chance to share, always feel free to share in the chat as well. But again, it looks like perfect. So we're seeing a lot of mentoring program staff practitioners and then a scattering of some mentors, educators, TA providers. Again, huge shout out to our TA providers across the country doing really amazing work to support our mentoring programs, and a few other folks from various other national organizations. So thanks again for being here. Stop that sharing. We'll definitely be sure to engage with you all a little bit more later in the webinar. Feel free to continue to drop any questions that you have either in the chat box or the Q&A. At the end, we'll have dedicated time for the panelists to answer any questions that you have. At the end of the webinar, there will be a 3 to 4 minute survey, completely anonymous. So make sure to fill that out. It'll pop up on your screen to let us know how we did. And then in about a week, you'll receive an email with information on how to download the recording of today's webinar, the slides, and any other resources that we talk about in today's call, all again on that website, National Mentoring Resource Center. So I think that's enough for me. Oh, perfect. Poll's already done. Very excited to first introduce Kenneth Harris, who will be leading today's presentation, and I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself and then our panelists.
All right, thanks, Jake. I appreciate it. So I'm the director of the National PAL, and my job is to go over all programs and make sure that we get the community involved so they know what we do at all of our local chapters, internationally and nationally, and then also introduce you into new concepts and strategies that we're providing to bring the community closer to law enforcement so that everybody is educated and understanding of the roles that they play and how impactful that they are. So today, as we have on the panel, Marcel Braithwaite out of New York City, and then we have Mr. Fred Hunter out of Detroit PAL. Today, Miss Judy had some complications with her health, so I'll be filling in, but she's from Santa Barbara PAL. So I'll be filling in myself because I have some experience being the deputy director previously at the Wilmington Police Athletic League in Delaware. So if we go on to the next slide, Jake. All right. So PAL's mission is in its member chapters to work to prevent juvenile crime and violence by building capacity between law enforcement and youth for the community and religious institutions for disenfranchised youth. National PAL hope is that their chance and the best alternative to changing their lives, all right, through challenges. So if we can go to the next slide, Jake. All right. So the National PAL teaches about community responsibility, life skills, character building, academic achievement, healthy living habits, and youth mentoring. All right. Next slide. All right. National PAL builds mutual respect with kids and law enforcement, community trust with law enforcement through education and engagement, character and self-esteem, also sustainable networks for long-term community problem solving. Slide. All right, National PAL empowers the youth by making the correct choices, code of ethics for life, youth confidence with competence, youth mentors to embrace and educate, and youth to become community role models. All right. So we do that through culture and ethics. All right. So youth perspectives on why they dress a particular way, why violence is respected in their neighborhood and understood by the residents in the community. Language, meaning the slang and metaphors used amongst their peers, their upbringing and being raised to have certain values, beliefs, and behaviors, but wanting different outcomes based on exposure with the police athletic league. Law enforcement staff gains an appropriate knowledge and wisdom to communicate with the youth and community at large. This provides an understanding for law enforcement while working and volunteering their time with the youth members. Next slide. All right. So also we do a lot of trust building at the PALs. So what that looks like is community events with law enforcement present, not in uniforms, but participating with families, engaging with the youth on a daily basis during programs, sporting events, and mentorship. This allows for the community and law enforcement to grow in a cultural competence together while spending time with one another, listening to understand and not play the blame game. Next slide. All right. Also, the restorative approaches. So coffee with a cop to break down stereotypes, overcoming barriers, and build bridges. Shop with the cop allows youth to see law enforcement as everyday citizens who have the same interests as them. Town hall meetings with the community and law enforcement. The POW prevention programs, which allows law enforcement to speak with the youth. Conflict resolution practices with law enforcement, meaning role play. And also victim impact panels, similar to what we're going to do today and we'll talk about soon. Next slide, please, Jake. All right, building and maintaining community relationships. So that is being accountable for your actions, respecting yourself and law enforcement with the same standard, express your unresolved issues and concerns in the appropriate arena and area, recognize and address holistically the root causes of crime. Next slide. All right, and POW is the answer, because POW creates the relationships between law enforcement and the community. POW gets the truth from the community. POW holds the youth accountable. POW provides exposure to gain a better outcome and change behavior. POW shifts the mentality and creates a positive enforcement to thrive. All right. Slide. All right, so now we'll get into the panel discussion where we'll go over things that I've addressed and then other questions that Jake has for us today. So.
Great. Thank you, Kenneth, for that overview of what PAL does. So I think we can start off actually with just the panelists introducing yourselves a little bit about your specific chapter and again, kind of how you came to this work particularly. And so we can start off with Fred.
Yeah, glad to be on here and welcome from Detroit. So Fred Hunter, presently the CEO of Detroit POW, and just a little bit of my background, born and raised, live and work in Detroit. I started this work in youth development about 24 years ago. A couple of friends of mine were starting a nonprofit that eventually merged with the Detroit POW. So I've had the last 18 years of working directly with police officers here in the city, and kids. As I love one of the slogans for National POW: kids, cops, and community. We're kids first organization, the power of bringing police officers together and in serving the community with what we do. So been in the CEO role for the last 2 years, and really thankful and glad to be on this panel.
Thanks so much, and I'll kick it over to you to Marcel.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Marcel Braithwaite. I'm the Director of Community Engagement for the New York City Police Athletic League. The NYC PAL works together with the NYPD and the law enforcement community to support and inspire New York City youth. I've been in the field for over 20 years. I've worked as a program director, a regional director. I've worked in all 5 boroughs of the New York City PAL: Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, Staten Island, in some of the toughest neighborhoods, in partnership with law enforcement and the communities that we serve. To Fred's point, our primary focus is youth and providing engaging opportunities for youth and doing it together with our partners in law enforcement so that we can continue to build stronger community relationships between the community and the law enforcement individuals that serve them.
Thank you. And then Kenneth, yeah, same to you. I know you're in a different position now, but if you wanted to speak to your work when you were at Wilmington.
Yes. So first of all, I'll start off with I'm a Wilmington native. So it was very important for me to give back to the area where I was born and raised. Not just talk about it, but be about it. So I wanted to do that with action and be in a community to serve kids in a population that was raised just like myself. So I was able to get the opportunity to do that at the Police Athletic League of Wilmington. And I came in as the deputy director. So I handled all the day-to-day and pretty much everything that came in and out of the facility was my responsibility. So I wanted to make sure that I gave the community, the families, and the participants something to brag about and be a part of versus having a bad reputation or somebody being concerned about where you're from and what that represents. So I wanted to leave a positive stamp on my neighborhood and actually lead by example. So that's what I did at the Wilmington PAL before now serving as a director of programs for the National Police Athletic League.
Thank you. I feel like it's always helpful just to know how someone gets to the work that they're doing now. So I appreciate you all sharing a little bit about that. And so I think, Kenneth, you already started to share a little bit about this throughout the presentation. But I feel like maybe a first question to start off for everybody is what can law enforcement mentoring offer that is unique versus other types of mentoring programs, right? There are so many mentoring programs across the country. A lot of them have specific niches or specific communities, but what can law enforcement mentoring specifically offer that's unique? And so, yeah, Ken, if you want to start, and then we can kind of just go down the line.
Yes, the first thing what happens is with law enforcement, they can answer a lot of questions that haven't been answered that people want to know, right? And especially with youth, right? Why it's important through the mentorship phase, because these teens, adolescents have a lot of questions. And their thing is, why am I a target, or what is it that I'm doing amongst my friends that we're having issues with the police, or they have a concern that are the police going to bother me? So, and then when there's an issue that occurs, right, they have firsthand protection, they have firsthand results, right? And they can get the answers to their questions. And then what that does is cultivate that relationship between the community, the youth, and law enforcement, because now they no longer look at them as a threat, but now it's a friend. It actually is a real mentor, because they'll see that this person is a human being like myself, and they had the same life experiences. And when we talk about an area, and it happens in a lot of places, urban communities or just small places, or even rural areas, you're going to come across a law enforcement officer who's grew up in that neighborhood, who's had the same challenges, an individual who did not think that, hey, they'll be in law enforcement one day, right? And then they can share their same experiences, and that creates the factor of how they become relatable. And then that starts to break some barriers. I'll pass it on to Fred.
Yeah, a big part for us of law enforcement goes back to the history of Detroit PAL. So we were started as an organization in 1969, and just a backdrop of history, in 1967, there was a real huge disconnect between the police department and the community. In fact, in the 1967, we had what's called the Detroit riots, or the Detroit Rebellion. So there was this huge disconnect. So the impetus of starting PAL was, how do we bring the community and police officers together? And the focus was on youth, because everyone knows, if you're taking care of my children, or you have committed people focusing on young people, then I'm going to have more trust and respect for you. So, what's been beautiful to see from that huge disconnect to the 55 years of history, having police officers engaged on a daily basis, you know, through sports programs, through enrichment programs with young people, help to really shape the perspective of law enforcement. And, you know, as Kenneth was saying, it's just so important, the relationship with law enforcement, because when you need a law enforcement, whether you like them or not, you call. But to be able to have that respect for law enforcement and see, you know, police officers as people, and that comes from that mentoring relationship. So it's a unique perspective, but very important for humanizing the badge and for also building those relationships, which are important for community.
Yeah, I think definitely raising up everything that Kenneth said and everything that Fred said. Um, I agree 100% with those points. So I'll try to say different points. The ones that I would say is that one of the unique things about law enforcement is that they are generally consistent in the communities that they serve. So if you can establish a consistent relationship with a law enforcement entity, whether it's a rural community, urban community, you're going to get some consistency about who is involved in the mentorship with your young people. And they'll turn around and see them 15 years later, 20 years later, right? So, and if you can set up your mentorship program, you know, well, and in partnership with law enforcement, you're leaning into the tradition, to the habit of law enforcement of having traditions. Law enforcement is very big on traditions. And if you can weave your mentorship into their part of their traditions, it becomes an automatic, almost standing thing that everybody expects to happen. And it can have a great impact on a community from generation to generation to generation. The other thing that I would say in terms of working specifically with law enforcement is that there's a real exposure to career opportunities for young people, not just in the enforcement element of law enforcement, but all the aspects of law enforcement. That if you don't have that exposure to somebody who's in that career path, you may not ever know. And so those are two, aside from the very good ones and very clear ones that Fred and Kenneth mentioned, that I think are also important. The ability to lean on tradition with law enforcement and make that a part of your program. And then two, the ability to make sure that young people have exposure to unique career opportunities that might be available within the law enforcement community.
That's great. Thank you all. I especially, I really love the point about consistency, because we know how important consistency is within mentoring and with young people, and being there and showing up, and how impactful that is in and of itself. So thank you for those answers. This is making me think kind of maybe a question that I should have asked first, but I'm wondering, for those in the audience who don't know, who aren't really necessarily familiar, I guess, with the model, the program structure of National PAL. I know we did a brief overview, but could you all speak to, like, how do you define mentoring? Like, what does that look like? Is it like a weekly meeting with a law enforcement officer and a young person? Is it group mentoring? Is it a mix of the two? Do they mainly attend events together? Yeah, could you share some maybe examples around what does mentoring look like in your specific programs? And maybe for that one, we'll start off with Fred.
Yeah, there's a variety that we have, you know, just based on programs. So some of the mentoring we do is group program. And I guess just to give a little backdrop on Detroit PAL. Right now we have 27 full-time staff members. We actually have 2 full-time police officers, and then 1 sergeant who's part-time with us. And then we use and access the Detroit Police Department. We do, with our programs, have mentoring through our volunteers. So we have about 900 volunteers that also work in addition for the mentoring aspect. And then this year we'll serve about 9,000 participants through our program. So mentoring is big for us. A lot of what we do is from the athletic side, you know, of Police Athletic League. So we run 12 different sports. So we have training for our coaches to serve as mentors. And some of those coaches are actually police officers. You know, we've got one specific team, the Detroit Seahawks in football, and, you know, we've got an inspector. So, you know, during the course of the day, he's involved in crime and arresting suspects, but he is just refreshed because he can come out and be a part of the team and part of the coach, and then really lift up youth, you know, through that sports aspect. So through sports, we have those type of mentoring, but we also have smaller group mentoring through other programs. So, some one-on-one, but a lot of times small group mentoring. So it depends, on the particular program, but there's a variety in terms of how we approach it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Marcel, what are you all doing in New York City?
So at New York City, PAL, we're working with the NYPD specifically, but the entire law enforcement community. And so it's a combination of working with local precincts, working with specialized units within PD. For instance, the PD has a unit that has a rock wall for adventure learning activities, right? So when we have special events, that unit will often come and work with young people on rock wall climbing and adventure learning. So that's one example. Similar to what Fred described, we do a lot in terms of sports leagues and having officers in our Cops and Kids program, coach, ref, play with young people, so that's one of the very unique opportunities where they get to engage together in team sports. That's always great. In New York City, we have the unique program which we help spearhead in partnership with the district attorney's office, called Saturday Night Lights, where we are able to provide programming late on Saturday nights, basketball instruction for local youth. And a big part of that is having officers present in the facility, to be in dialogue with youth, to face problems that come up. Some of the communities that we work in, the problems come up in the gym, right? So having officers present is a real benefit. We do a lot of special events in New York City, and we rely very heavily on our partners in NYPD and the law enforcement community to provide volunteers, to provide support, to be in fellowship and engagement with our young people. But in addition, we also do a lot of small dialogue work, small group work, where teenagers primarily have an opportunity to be in dialogue, honest dialogue with officers about their concerns, their perspective, and officers get to do the same. We do that with officials throughout the law enforcement community. I saw something pop up on the chat. In New York City, we do it. I think we do a little bit of both. I would say most of the officers that work with us come in uniform. A lot of that has to do with their own regulations in the city about how they can show up for work. And oftentimes when they're working with us, they are still on the job, and they have to be in uniform. But we do have some officers that either carve out time, or they're working undercover, so they're not in strict uniform and they're engaging with young people. But we see a little bit of both, and there are definitely young people who have had bad experiences with officers and feel away. One of the things that we stay committed to is that this is the Police Athletic League. This is why we're here, to face those concerns, to give voice to them for the young people that have legitimate concerns with policing in their communities, and allow them to voice that in a productive and healthy way. And that officers feel comfortable being in spaces where they can engage with young people. So when it comes up, we face it. We don't hide from it.
So, and for myself, obviously, we had the same programs that Mr. Fred had, and also Mr. Marcel. But ones that I'm particularly happy about are the ones that you won't hear about, are things that we keep in-house. So for me, when it comes to mentorship, every opportunity to speak with that kid and engage with them is me mentoring and providing that back. And I've tried to teach that to the team members, so that we start to see different and better results. Because sometimes as adults, we don't know what that looks like, or we may just assume, or we're just doing what we've always done, but not necessarily getting the results that we've always needed or wanted. So the mentor to myself is, when I think about mentorship, when that kid is kicked out of school in the middle of the day, or when they get suspended, my thing is, hey, mom, auntie, dad, whomever, uncle, I'll go get them, right? Because they would contact the Police Athletic League, right? They say, hey, this kid is acting up in school. We don't know what to do. Sometimes they can't reach the parents. So that was my opportunity to stop what I'm doing and show this kid that, hey, Mr. Kenny cares about you. The Police Athletic League cares about you, and we're going to be here for you if nobody else is here for you. And I did that on a consistent basis, which allowed now for the kids to see, okay, I am important. So I had a few kids, 5 of them, who would always get in trouble. So I said, hey, you guys are going to be leaders, right? And now we're the leadership program. So I would meet with them every single day after school, right? And then what that did was that shifted the entire behavior around the Police Athletic League, where we're serving over 400 kids a day. But you got 4 kids that's shifting that behavior, right? So things like that. And then also, I kept all officers in uniform, because when you're in an urban environment, there's a great disdain for law enforcement. But when law enforcement is showing up every day for nothing, or just to read, just to play basketball, just to play football, just to show up and support you while you're at your sporting event, or you're acting, doing a drama scene, right? Now you're saying, I see that person for who they are and not for the badge that they're wearing, right? And then now it's easier to listen to them and understand them, right? And then that allows for that officer now to be valuable to that kid by providing some mentorship, because now they have a relationship. Now they can have some dialogue, right? So when they leave with their mom or dad, who also has a disdain, they're saying, okay, Officer Ryan, I'll see you later, right? And it's, oh, so now the parents respect that law enforcement officer, right? What now trickles down to all the other law enforcement that they'll see during an event or not during an event. So I love to have the officers in uniform, because that builds the unity. And now we're following the mission, right? Which is, kids, cops, and community for the most part. So for me, another thing was, I like to hold people accountable. So being from the neighborhood, and people say, okay, Kenny, you there, you did it, right? Hey, give me a job. Okay, I got a job for you. Every Monday, you're gonna come and talk to these kids if you really changed, or if you really wanna make an impact, right? That's your payment, that's your check. And if you can keep that up, potentially, yes, you can have a job here, but also bring your kids, because I wanna make sure that not only are you doing right here, but you're doing right outside of here, because they're going to tell the truth about their parent, right? We know kids don't lie, right? So my thing was challenging people from my community to stand on business, right? And, these are people who have been in the justice system, right? So the justice involved. They've been shot. They hated the cops at one time. They fought the cops. But now, and those kids coming from the neighborhood saying, that guy's a bad guy. He's a rough guy. He's a tough guy. He's a gangster. He's a thug, right? And I want to be like him. But for him to come in and say, hey, don't be like me. Be better than me, right? Make sure that you get an education. Make sure that you're following the rules. Make sure you understand the law. And these guys would come in and talk about the point system, right? Because jail's not just a go back and forth thing. And although you may get off for this crime, you got points for it. So the next time you commit a crime, you'll do a long time in jail for it, right? So I like to make sure that I held the adults accountable. And then every chance that I got, I was able to give to the kids what I needed at their age. And then also the things that I did get at their age. So that's what mentorship means to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. There's so many things in there that I want to highlight. I think one thing in particular is the idea of every opportunity that we get when we speak to young people is mentorship, or I should say it can be if you approach it in the right way. And at Mentor, we call that the mentoring mindset, and leading with certain things like empathy, leading with things like holding young people, holding ourselves accountable, and things like that. So thank you for highlighting that. And then the other thing I'll say there is, I love the point around showing up for all parts of a young person's life, not just when they're in trouble or not when they're getting suspended, but showing up for those sports events, showing up just to read or whatever. I remember when I worked directly with young people in like a classroom setting, I would go up and I'd be like, hey, can we talk? Immediately their response would be like, oh my God, am I in trouble? And that's because so many young people have been like conditioned whenever an adult comes up to them and says, can we talk? Or, hey, can I pull you aside for a second? That the idea is that they're in trouble, they did something wrong. But most of the time, 95% of the time, it would be me highlighting something that they did right, something that they helped their friend out with their homework, or they did this thing, they included this other friend in this game. Like, and so I think being there at all of those different points and all of those different touch points is so important. So I'm glad that you brought that up. But the other thing that I guess that leads into the next question that you all sort of touched on at one point or another was this idea around dialogue. And since a lot of the benefit of law enforcement mentoring is or has to do with the mentors being able to answer questions and kind of provide some different types of insights that maybe young people wouldn't get otherwise. I'm wondering if you all could share if you have any examples of like, what are the types of things that young people ask or talk about with their mentors in these small groups. And the reason why I'm asking this is if people out there in the audience, they're not really involved in law enforcement mentoring, but they want to make the case of why we should get more law enforcement officers as mentors, or why we should maybe form some sort of partnership. Like, what are the specific types of things that are the specific types of topics that are covered in those conversations that you think would be helpful for our audience to know? And anybody can feel free to start with that one.
Yeah, I'll chat on one specific program that we developed called Critical Conversations. And just to give you perspective, this was developed during COVID. So with the pandemic, we weren't able to interact. And it was also after the murder of George Floyd. So what you saw from a police relations perspective is that gap was growing just because there was a lot of really disdain and hatred towards police officers. So we worked together with a funding partner and said, we need to get back together with kids. So we started it online, and the goal was to have these critical conversations because a lot of the separation comes from really mistruths, not having the right information. And, as you were saying, Jay, just the importance of being able to talk. So we actually introduced the officers, in their normal, what they'd wear on furlough. So they didn't know they were police officers, which for us in this initially online environment, we do it now in person, just created that human factor as well. And then when we, introduced them again as police officers, the kids were like, whoa, it just seemed like regular people, which is what they really are. But the conversation topics go to, roles of police officers. So, the different type of cars that police officers have. We did a lot of modeling in terms of, just interaction, with police officers, how to handle yourself in the right way, how to understand what police officers are thinking, and actually putting kids in the roles of police officers to handle things as well. So kids being able to speak openly, to have time to speak openly, and then to be able to, share from their perspective as well, help to improve the respect and the view of law enforcement, and is also key for law enforcement as well to see kids in that environment as well. So it's a mutually beneficial, and we've been running the program for the last 5 years.
Thank you for that. Marcel, Kenneth, any other examples? Again, the initial question was, what types of things are young people and mentors talking about in these small group dialogues that they're having?
You want to go, Mr. Marcel, or you want me to go?
It's up to you. I can go if you want to go. It's up to you.
All right, I'll go. So for me, we always made it about the kid, right? Because you want to hear their side of the story, and you want them to be as authentic as possible and free. So for the small mentorship groups that we provided, it would have them reflect, right? So it was actually called reflections, right? And then also like a psychodrama, right? So you are speaking to a peer as if they're the individual that you've had an uncertainty with. So a lot of gentlemen, young gentlemen at the PAL that I served, they had issues at home, right? It could be, a lot of them was with dad per se, right? We would say dad more often than mom or any other family member. So we would have little Johnny speak to little Kevin, and he would say, "Hey man, we had a conversation and I'm upset because you said you were going to pick me up and you didn't." And then they would express how they feel, right? Now, little Kevin is shocked because he's like, "Oh, snap. This guy's talking to me as if I am really his dad," right? So now what that happens, a few things happen. The kids respect each other now, and they have boundaries based off of the small groups that they've had. And then also they can relate to it. And then also it allows them to open up and be vulnerable as well about a situation that occurred with them, right? And then this is how the police officers get involved, and they're able to explain, because kids somehow think that, the cops just took my mom, they just took my dad. But when we have Officer Ryan in there, right, or we have the visiting officers who come in and who are now mentors, we also engage them in the conversation, right? And that allows for answers for the questions. So that's what we do. We get to the nitty gritty. We make it about the kid and an environment which they're very comfortable, and they can share if they want. And some of them don't have to, but what happens is everybody shares because they see the response and respect that they're giving to one another. So that's very huge. That was a very huge success for us at the Wilmington PAL. You're on mute, Mr. Marcel.
Yep.
Apologies. Yeah, just picking up on that point. I think creating the right environment, regardless of what the kind of the mentorship or dialogue questions are, is the most important thing. And I think a great way to do that is to do as much as possible, some of the planning in partnership with law enforcement. Oftentimes we will plan something and invite them versus sitting together and plan and think about it together so that everybody feels comfortable. That includes the young people, them being a part of the planning as well. I think the questions we get from young people are pretty standard. Why do we get arrested? Why do cops profile us? Why do police officers think that all young people are bad? What are my rights? And then from officers get similar kind of questions. Why are young people out at this hour doing things they shouldn't do? Why to have young people not listen when we ask them to do ABC? Why are young people at this particular place where we told them not to be and they're still there, right? So officers have legitimate questions sometimes that they really want to understand what young people are thinking, and those are good. I think outside of that kind of standard dialogue, which I think is critical, one of the things that we did, and this kind of leads to this point of other areas of law enforcement, and I saw a thing came up in the chat around officers working in a city or in a community, but living outside of it. And one of the things that we found successful is talking to all the elements of law enforcement that exist in your community. So luckily in the city, we have a robust law enforcement community. That's district attorneys' offices, departments that are adjacent to enforcement. One of them was the Department of Investigation, and they were very supportive in doing a job fair dialogue with some of our interns. And so the questions were very different. They brought their canine unit, they brought their cyber investigators, they brought their attorneys, they brought some of their administrative staff. And what was interesting is that some of the staff were not that far in age from our young people, maybe like 10 years older. And they were able to have a dialogue about technology, or a dialogue about the canine unit, or a dialogue about, where do you have to go to school to do this kind of job? So I think when you think about the other areas of law enforcement and making sure that they have a seat or a place in your mentorship mix, you get a different flavor of questioning from the young people as well as from the individuals who are in those roles. And it just makes the it makes the dialogue a little bit more robust and dynamic.
Right, right. Thank you all. Thank you. Yeah, especially for me, that's just really helpful to hear kind of the types of questions and conversations that are happening. And I think that leads well into a mix of my next question and a question that came up in the chat from Laura. Thank you for this, Laura, around training, because these conversations are difficult, they're complex. There's a lot of perspectives involved. And so training is really essential in having these conversations in education. So the question is for, again, whoever, and maybe we'll start with Marcel this time. What sorts of trainings or efforts have you seen as effective for your mentors or for law enforcement? And again, maybe even more specifically, what types of training around cultural humility or cultural sensitivity are you doing? And what have you seen to be effective?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, one of the things that we found, or I've found very successful in working with law enforcement is being acutely aware of their priorities, right? As law enforcement, they often have a priority that may supersede something that you planned, and it might have to do with somebody's safety or somebody's life, right? So we have to have that respect for their time. As such, I found it somewhat challenging to do training for law enforcement officers in the same way that I would do training for a staff member that I pay, right? So one of the things that we really try to do is, one, be aware of what training the law enforcement community here in New York City, NYPD, what training they are getting and how that might, you know, dovetail into what we're doing with young people, and really lean on officers that are getting that training. One, two, to really combine officers with staff members that we know have very clear training and standards and best practices around mentorship, so that the officers are almost learning and training by following a model, right? Versus trying to carve out, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this. And if you can do this in your city, town, or wherever, I think great. You should carve out time for training. It's important. I'm just expressing, for us, doing that has always proved difficult. So we've leaned on those other two methods around how to you know, train officers specifically around being prepared to be mentors. The other thing that I would say we do is we keep our eyes and ears open for when NYPD is doing training and they ask us to attend, right? So, because then that puts us as staff in a position where we get to see how they work, what training they're receiving, the language that they're using, and it gives us a better avenue to have dialogue with them, to be prepared for mentorship, to be prepared for us to work together. That's kind of the way that we handle training on our end, specifically for officers.
Kenneth, do you want to take that one next? Again, the question was, what types of training have you found to be effective in building mentoring relationships between law enforcement and communities?
Well, for me, that's personal development. And that's my favorite one. Because what that's going to do is it's going to see you where you are now, what you've been doing, right? All the way up into the current point and state of mind that you're in now, and how you process information, right? Because ultimately, all of that will define how you're going to conduct yourself when you're faced with any adversity. And you know, you're going to face a lot of that when you're dealing with youth, and then also just dealing with parents, right? Because you got helicopter parents and their kid could be 21 years old, right? They shouldn't even be in your facility, but you'll have that happen, right? So as long as you focus on doing the right thing, the right way, no matter the situation, you're going to conduct yourself appropriately. And then that's going to cause for that individual to have to do some serious soul searching. So for me, I had to embed that in my team, right? For all of our team members, they had to understand that, right? And they had to have self-awareness, social emotional awareness, right? Code of ethics, and then understand that they want to be treated this way, that they have to treat the consumers and customers who are in and out of our facility like this every single day, right? Because you never know what a person is challenged with, right? So personal development was my thing, and that led to some great success and appropriate turnover that we needed in the facility. When it comes to law enforcement, and this is just for people, but since we're talking about the law enforcement piece, once again, you just want to gain and understand it. So for me, it was easier to have a conversation because law enforcement respected my title, right, and my position. So when we had conversations, my thing was, do you understand the community that you're working in? Do you understand the people? How, why, and why not? And then I would enlighten them. So, and once again, all of that was just personal development. They had to be open to hearing the information and then go out and actually apply it, right? In the facility or just while they're on the beat, because they're going to be faced with challenges every single day. And then, you know, that's the same as, you know, culture and ethics, right? So once you understand those things, you'll be very successful because you won't be out just offending anyone on purpose or intentionally. And you'll try to do the right thing and people will understand that. So I did that through a lot of personal development. And then I would get with other chapters who were thriving and had great success. And I would take my team there to see it. And then we did it also amongst a lot of team building, And that got people to see the strength and weaknesses of their counterparts and then how they can support one another, right? But once again, all of that started with the personal development trainings that I implemented.
Great, thank you. Fred, anything else to add? Any other ideas?
Just to say again, the culture, I heard culture, and then just the standards and the environment that you create. So this isn't a law enforcement; it's a youth development organization. It's a youth development culture. So from the leaders to the staff, creating that culture, it sets a standard, and that's a big part of how we train and get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you added that. I think that's huge. It's again, and even connecting it back to Kenneth, what you were saying earlier of just every interaction that you have with young people, that you have with your coworkers, whoever you're working with, parents, those are all opportunities. And the more we see it as an opportunity, the better we can lead intentionally and with care and with respect. So I think making sure these things are infused throughout the culture, the organizational culture is huge. So thank you for that. Awesome. So my next question for you all, and again, we've touched on this in some different conversations, but thinking about, again, partially that question around if law enforcement officers live outside of the city or the community, or Kenneth, to your point, when you ask folks the question, do you understand the community that you're working with? What are some things that mentors or law enforcement officers do to build relationships with the community and or specifically with young people? And I know some of you have mentioned the various events, but are there any other things that folks that you're working with are intentionally doing to build that trust, build that sense of community with the folks that you're serving?
Yeah, so for me, I just wanted them to be visible and be at the center, because when you're at the center, you have no choice but to fall into the presence of the kids that we serve, right? So when you come and you're here on a consistent basis, it'll happen authentically, right? I never wanted to make it uncomfortable for the law enforcement or for the kids, because what happens is they get uncomfortable with the conversation, and it's very simple, and it's, hey buddy, how you doing? I guess you like basketball, and they got a basketball in their hand. Like, no, you don't want to do it. So my thing was, get comfortable and get in where you fit in. And for me, for the community, I would have a lot of giveaways, right? And my thing was, I'm going to flood this thing with the officers giving it away, right? And controlling the crowd in a respectful manner. And once that happened, it's now once the joke starts, now you got them, right? And that's on either end. And both parties would take advantage of that. And then that would create, the dialogue, right? Because like, oh, you the same cop that pulled me over yesterday? And then that cop was like, it could have been me. What was you driving? Something raggedy, right? And they start to laugh. And then it's, hey, well, listen, I got a question because I received a ticket on my car. Or, hey, when I turn and I got my signal on, and now I go up and I make another turn, like, hey, can you guys pull me over for that? Or like, hey, why do you follow me for so long, right? Like, hey, I know it wasn't you yesterday, it was another cop, but can you tell me that? And then they start to have dialogue. It breaks down. So now when they see him, it's a first name basis, or hey, officer, and it's not a mean mug. It's not y'all always effing with me, right? Because we would see this, right? All of that stuff just went out of the window. So for me, it was just be here. And if your presence is here, you're going to run into them. Something is going to occur. Something's going to happen. And I let law enforcement know, because I know sometimes they get so discouraged and they're so angry. And I said, listen, I don't care what the community says. I don't care what people say. Because when something happens, the first person that they call is 911, right? I don't care who you are. I don't care what it is. When something has occurred, you call 911. So, but that's what I do. I just put them in a position to be successful. That's what I call
it. Yeah, that's great. I think that consistency is the key. If I couldn't say anything else, I would say the consistency is the key. Having that consistent time. I think also that idea of leaning into traditions, that some officers are great at just picking up the tradition of what a former officer did and just continuing it, right? They don't necessarily want to do anything new. They want to do what the book says. They're in law enforcement. That's one of the things that appeal to them about law enforcement. It's things are a certain way. You're supposed to do things by the book. You're supposed to do things at a certain time. And that kind of consistency and tradition appeals to some officers, and they thrive on that. If you just give them the lead on something that's established. I think one of the other things that we've seen is like when you lean into officer specific talents or interests. So we had officers that DJ on the side, or officers that play double dutch, or officers that are in a band, and when they have an opportunity, or they're avid readers, and when they have an opportunity to do something that's of interest to them, they are more excited and engaged about doing it, and want to come with the plan and want to come with the ideas, and really allowing for that part to happen together. We're not just saying, hey, this is the time you show up, Officer Joe, and just mentor a kid, versus, the respect, hey, how do we do this together? What's a good time? How would you want to do it? When would you want to do it? What are some elements that you have in mind that might work better for you and your department and your colleagues? What age group kids do you really want to focus on? Really giving the law enforcement community an opportunity to be part of the planning, I think, is one of the best ways to be successful of building a strong mentorship component with them.
Great, thank you.
Great comments.
Awesome. And so we've sort of already talked about this next question in some ways. I know various folks have mentioned some of the challenges and the feelings of disconnection or feelings of mistrust. But yeah, I'm wondering if you all could speak to, just in general, what more challenges have come up in this work, and then how have you navigated those challenges? And maybe we'll kick it off with Fred.
The Critical Conversations program, there's specific weeks. It's about a 6-week program, and a couple of things that we do in those weeks, talk about the role of police and citizens. One week we talk about the influences of social media on law enforcement, have open conversations about police misconduct, and the few bad apples that have an influence on people's perception of all officers. And then when you can have these open conversations in these areas, and the youth know that they can share their thoughts and perspective and be received, and then also hear from the police officer. It gains trust, but it also builds knowledge and dispels myths. There's one role model session we do in the maintaining positive interactions with law enforcement, where we actually set up chairs, in terms of like 4 chairs, like you're in a sitting in a car, and the youth then are the police officers that come to the car, and the officers are in the chair, and it's very revealing how challenging different situations can be, because we'll always throw a wrench in the plans, and someone acts and does something a little bit differently. But when we do that and actually sit down and talk through it, it helps to build a better understanding of law enforcement and what they have to go through. And the beautiful part of mentoring with police is also the police are able to build a strong understanding and see youth in a different perspective. Because you imagine on the enforcement side, if you're seeing 12, 14, 16, 18-year-olds acting badly, you can gain that perspective in terms of this is what youth are like. But when they're involved in PAL programs and they see young people and they're able to hear about their dreams and their aspirations and what they want to become, and see them enjoying and having fun, it helps to also shape the officer as a mentor as well. So it's important for society, for the kids to see from the officer's standpoint, but also the officers to see young people being young people, and then also being able to be involved and engaged in their lives. It's just a very important and unique perspective that police athletic leagues have the opportunity to do.
Yeah, I think that that point around young people around law enforcement seeing young people as young people as well is really big. Thank you for that. Yeah,
Yeah, I'll just say real quickly, I think that there's no reason to, at least my opinion, to hide from the idea that there's a difficult relationship historically between law enforcement and communities that they serve, particularly communities that are most in need of law enforcement support, right? Because of crime, poverty, and a whole host of other factors. And I think that to Fred's point, PAL has a unique perspective where we can be forthright that we are working with law enforcement. So there's no subterfuge, right? That's what we're doing. And that our main interest is the young people in this community. So if you're here in any space to make that a positive thing, this is the place to do it. Now we're going to face problems. One of the things that we found successful is opening our doors for detectives to do briefings to the community around major criminal activity. Now, this is not exclusively for youth. It's more for families and adults, but it is an exercise in trust building, right? A space where officers feel comfortable sharing what's happening within the laws of what they can share, and community feels like, well, they're getting actual real-time information about what's happening in their neighborhood. I think also having our staff interact with officers, we often focus on, the officer interaction with the young people, which is critical. I think there's real value to in building that camaraderie and dialogue between our staff who are not officers and the officers that we work with, so that they can be also models to the young people of, I know this officer, or, we did a training with that officer the other day. This is something that you should think about. So I think not shying away from the idea that there's going to be difficulties in that relationship, and finding ways to keep the doors open for the open dialogue and exchange is the best way to face it.
All right, Jake. So I know you were talking about things that are very challenging, and the things that I've experienced that have been very challenging at my local PAL chapter was the community wanting something, and you providing it or giving it to them, and they don't take advantage of it. That was very disappointing because, as a community center, as a hub for the community, you know, you want their input, you want their feedback because you value it. And then me, being from the city and the area, it was disappointing because I'm giving you exactly what you say you want and need to be successful and for your kid and your families. And, you know, I have the control and authority to provide it. And I do, and you don't take advantage of it. That is so disappointing because day in and day out, you think of how can I become better for my community? How can I become better for the team? How can I become better for the people that I serve? And you come up with these great ideas, so you think, or you do exactly what they want you to do, and they don't take advantage of it. I mean, that is so disheartening because you said, if I was a kid again, or if I was a little bit younger, I would take advantage of that and I would be far more successful than I am now, right? That's the hurt piece. And then also when you encounter the community and for some reason they just think you landed in this spot, right? Whether they know you or not, and they think that, oh, everything was given to you, right? You didn't have to work for anything, but they don't understand that I was their neighbor for years, right? I was just the one running around being a knucklehead, so you overlooked me, right? But you don't see all the work that I put in to get to this point to make sure that your grandkids don't do what I did and they could, you know, excel straight past me, you know, so that your kids can be more successful, right? So your nieces and nephews can be more successful, and they don't want it. People just want to talk. And that's very disappointing to me because, you know, when you have the opportunity to succeed, I just believe or thought that, you know, you always wanted to get out of that rough position. And you say, this is how you get out of it. Here you go. And people don't take advantage of it. That's the part that gets me the most, and it hurts.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I feel like I'm sure almost everybody in this call, whether or not they work in law enforcement mentoring or what they were, just regular one-to-one mentoring, any type of youth development professional has probably kind of felt similar feelings of frustration and confusion around like the programming is here, why not taking advantage of it? But I think there are so many barriers out there, systemic, personal, whatever, that also are in play of why everything could be in front of someone and they still maybe wouldn't be able to engage with the program or an initiative. So definitely want to just, I think everybody can probably relate to that feeling. So thank you for naming that. I think that actually is kind of like a good segue into my next question, which again is kind of mixed in with a question from the audience, because we've talked a decent amount, especially in this challenges section, around the feelings of disconnection and mistrust. And then especially towards the beginning of the conversation, we talked about how you've all seen youth perspectives kind of change around law enforcement through your work and community perspectives. I'm wondering if you all could speak to, have you seen any patterns in how perspectives have changed from the side of officers? So like when in the officers and other law enforcement professionals you're working with, how have their perspectives on the young people that they're working with changed? Yeah, period. How have they changed? And whoever can start with that question.
Yeah, with the Critical Conversation program, we had an opportunity to run the program in Buffalo. So Buffalo PAL ended up running the program. And, you know, one thing that happened, there was a officer in the program, and he was almost going to quit being a police officer because the reason that he got into policing was to protect and serve, but he didn't see a way to give back and impact his community. But this program put him right there in a mentoring capacity, in a conversation capacity. So it really helped to change his confidence, you know, in why he chose the profession. So those mentoring opportunities really help officers do what they, you know, what they pledge to do, to protect and serve. So, so that was one that was very key. And an officer that I worked with, it was just real significant because I remember he was, involved in a chase. And when he ended up, catching the individual, it was just a 14-year-old boy, that he saw. And that was his previous work. When he started working with PAL, now he had the opportunity to work with the same age young people, but then to be able to do it in the youth development in an uplifting way. So that perspective of being around young people, seeing young people, and in giving to young people really helps to change your perspective, and that's one of the changes that we've seen with police officers.
Yeah, we see definitely something similar. I'd say it's a definite spectrum. Definitely see some officers that really get a lot of joy out of being engaged with youth when they retire, decide to do work connected with youth on their own, start their own organizations, officers that get promoted into higher civilian roles within the government, and they continue to have a focus on young people as part of their new charge and responsibilities. That's on the positive end of the spectrum. Officers deal with some very serious crimes and criminal activity. So in spite of what great things they see from young people in our sites, in our centers, in our programs, definitely some officers that their perspectives do not change, not because of their engagement with us, but because of their engagement with other young people who are outside of our purview, and we don't have the ability to reach them, or at least have not yet. I think for me, the big thing is, if I can get anywhere on that spectrum, that an officer, when they are not engaged with us, because of their engagement with us, when they see a young people in one of those circumstances, something is going to click in their mind. Well, this is a young person that I seen at PAL, or this is a young person like the person I saw at PAL, or something is going to trigger for them that will humanize the experience. That's like on the lowest end of the spectrum of what I reach for, but I think it's an important dynamic, because you're not going to get every officer on that far end of the spectrum. But if I can get a critical mass of officers to have that pause when they're engaged with a young person here in New York City because of some experience they had at PAL, I count that as a win.
Great. Very similar. But I know for myself, you know, it was about relationships with those police officers, but then also they wanted to have a little input, or they brought great value with them. So allowing them to be successful in their own walk and actually provide something was like a ripple effect. And then that torch passed to that officer, passing it to their buddies, and them having ideas, them wanting to give back to the Police Athletic League in different ways. So that created a successful pattern for us while I was there, and allowing them to be who they are, and then learning from their mistakes. And we would do that once again just by me having a conversation, because sometimes you get the kids and they want to come to the PAL because all the kids are there, they're having a good time, or you got sporting events, and they just want to pop up. As soon as they get there, they want to be troublemakers. And some of the cops are like, hey, well, tell me why you are the way you are, right? And it starts with a conversation. That kid will lead. Some of them will lead. Some of them want to change their behavior right then and there. But once that cop sees that they got the impact, and then somebody come and apologize, and right, and if we got a huge event or we got multiple cops there, they say, you know what? I can do the same thing. Whether I'm from the community or not, or whether I understand it or not, it's just a conversation, right? Of being open to hearing what they have to say and then responding appropriately. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, thank you all. I really appreciate, Marcel, your point around, at the bare minimum, if we can if there can be that pause in a law enforcement officer, whether it's like this is a person who goes to PAL or someone like them, and that makes them that humanizes them a little bit more. I think that's especially really huge and really important for young people. But great. So I've been already sort of incorporating some of the audience questions, but we do have a couple other ones that I definitely want to get to. And it actually ties in with one of my last questions that we had prepared. But someone is asking, what is the process for establishing PAL? My community doesn't have one, but the department created PACT, police and communities together. Are they missing out on benefits because they are not a PAL? And maybe I'll turn that over to you, Kenneth.
Yeah, so what I'll say is, because that's very long-winded, and I don't mind talking, but I know everybody has places to be and things to do, but I can be reached at 202-455-5507. Also, my email address is kharris@nationalpal.org. And I can answer any questions that you have surrounding that. And we can get the ball rolling. And I can tell you what the PAL was missing, what you need. Sure, I'll put it in the chat, but I'll lead you the way so that we can get these things rolling because we're always open and looking forward to having more police athletic leagues around the nation, because I feel like, and I know a lot of my counterparts feel like PAL is the way. Obviously, for reasons that we stated today throughout this presentation, and then also the bullet points that I went over. But I mean, what better place is there to be than a place who's actually going to protect you along the way? A lot of times when you join any other organization, you got to go through multiple channels just to get some things done. But here at the Police Athletic League, you got that mentor, you got that cop that's just riding by. They just know that you're a member or they're there. You got the staff and they're going to do something immediately, right? That means there is no wait. That means we're going to get something done now. All right. So a lot of kids, a lot of people, period, nowadays, they want things microwave ready. So if you want to get that microwave ready meal, you should join the Police Athletic League.
That actually, and this question can be really for anybody, but it ties in with that first one. What is important for programs who are beginning to develop partnerships or relationships with their local law enforcement agencies to keep in mind? In your experience, what are maybe some tips or like secrets that maybe might help develop those partnerships for folks?
I got a couple of those. Law enforcement is hierarchical, so I think there's real value at starting at the top. Doesn't mean that you're going to be sitting in the chief of police or whoever the local top official is. You might not be their best friend, but at the very least, you should be actively trying to cultivate a relationship with the top law enforcement official in your neighborhood, city, or town. And wherever you land in that spectrum, you cultivate that relationship. I'd also say it's equally important to treat all officers equally, regardless if there are the whatever. I don't know to describe a role as low, but if they are the newest recruit on the force to the top official, they should all be treated with equal regard and respect, regardless of their rank or title, particularly in law enforcement, because you just never know when somebody's going to move up, somebody's going to get promoted, somebody's going to be really anxious and engaged to be involved, and just because they don't have a rank doesn't mean they might not have something to offer. I'd also say maintaining a consistent schedule. There's nothing that I've seen turn law enforcement off more than when we schedule something and we cancel it, or we fall off, or our schedules are loose. I think it's just a real no-no in working with law enforcement. They thrive on consistency and scheduling. It's a big part of their work. So I think it's important to respect it. And then also respecting their traditions and respecting their priority. Like, some things come up sometimes that they may have to cancel on us because something that has come their way is just so much more connected to their highest priority of protecting and the safety of the public. And I think if we really plan to be good partners with them, we have to respect that element of their work. And the last thing I'd say is, don't be a fair weather friend. If you're going to work with law enforcement, you got to commit to it and be proud and happy about it. You can't be like, oh, I don't like them because the rest of the country's not happy with them this week, or something really bad happened, so I'm not picking up the phone, right? I think you got to be in it to win it, and be consistent with your partnership, regardless of the ups and downs that law enforcement themselves may go through.
I would say have an understanding. Everybody has a role and responsibility and a job to do, right? So just have an understanding and cultivating a positive relationship. All right. Not always coming with your hand out, needing something, right? But just inviting people to your events, to your fundraiser, making them feel important because they are. But not only that, these are the same things that we as people want in return. So why not give people the same type of respect and energy that we feel as though we deserve or we're entitled to? So when you understand that, you'll go a long way. And I believe that, everything will get answered and it'll be all right. And you'll have the relationship that you deserve to have.
Yeah, well said. Respect relationships. That's so important. Well said.
Thank you all. And then the other question that we had in the Q&A was, I work with youth mentees in schools and police mentors visit them in the schools. I struggle with officers being in uniform / possessing a weapon coming into a school. Any advice for overcoming this challenge, either with their department or increasing trust and understanding on my end? And maybe Fred, let's start with you this time.
Let me shoot that one over to Kenneth. Just
Cool.
Okay. Well, I'll say once again, it's just the understanding aspect. So they're a police officer. They're supposed to have a weapon on them because they're also here to protect and to serve. So let's say they were in the school and something happened, as we've had multiple mass shootings. What are they going to do to protect you, right? Besides tell you to get under the table and hit a door. How will they be able to apprehend the suspects? So I think on the individual's end, they have to understand that it may be uncomfortable for them, meaning, how they feel. But, when you have a feeling, the feeling is not always valid in the answer. Although you should, feel that way because that's how you feel. So it's acceptable. But they just got to understand that law enforcement has a job to do. And them having that weapon is there to protect them, right? That's pretty much my take on it.
Yeah, I'd say, that's an important element that Kenneth is bringing up. Some departments, it's their regulation. They don't have a choice about whether or not to remove their weapon. And if we're asking them to work with us, then we have to be mindful and understanding of that, as Kenneth has said. If for some reason there's a desire to do something different, I'd say then that's where the idea of planning together ahead of time is important. If law enforcement are willing to work on volunteer basis on hours when they're not on duty, and that makes it a lot easier for them to come in their own personal clothes or without their service weapon, then that might be an approach that's worthwhile. That one takes more planning, and then two, it takes an additional commitment from those individuals to volunteer their time in addition to what their work time would be. And that's kind of, I think, also along the lines of where that cultivation with the top official is important. Being able to voice that honestly. Listen, we have a school population. Some folks have voiced it as a concern. Is there anything that you can propose that might be a middle ground? And if a top official is aware of it, because of the nature of law enforcement, they're more likely to be able to do something that might, meet folks in the middle. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Before I wrap up with just a couple more slides, I do want to just open it up to you all to see if there's any last thoughts or things that you'd like to share with the audience about anything that we covered today, anything that we didn't cover, and then I can wrap us up. But yeah, we'll start off with Kenneth. Any last thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for participating today, hearing what we have to say. Hopefully it was valuable and it would help you as you proceed along in your respectable careers of mentoring others, you know, administrative work, teachers, counselors, camp advisors, whatever it is that you do. Hopefully you gain some knowledge and you can take some notes. I know Mr. Fred, Marcel, Jake has some great feedback. But for me, I want to make sure that everybody understands and they know that police athletic leagues are here. You know, we want to grow. We want to help you in any way, shape, or form possible. You can reach out to me and we can get the ball rolling. But we're in the community and we are here for you. All right. So please take advantage of us every step of the way. There's a lot of programs that we have. Every police athletic league is so unique and they offers a different aspect and fit that may be geared to what your needs and wants are. So please check us out in a neighborhood near you. And if you're interested in starting a police athletic league, reach out to myself and we can get the ball rolling. But I just want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for all of the feedback, people who are asking questions, who have things in the chat box. I see it going off. And I just want to say that we're very grateful and thankful to have this opportunity with you as well, Jake.
Of course. Awesome. Fred or Marcel, any last thoughts?
Yeah, no, appreciate the opportunity, and yeah, just like Kenneth said, there's you know, police athletic leagues. I know we have an annual conference, and to see really literally hundreds from all across the country, from you know the large ones that are serving you know thousands of youth every year to those that are you know serving smaller amounts with you know one police officer or one staff member. So there's a variety, but I think we all share in common the importance of mentorship. And how do we, in whatever role, you know, lift up young people through those mentoring opportunities? So I appreciate the opportunity for the conversation.
Yeah, on behalf of the New York City Police Athletic League, I'd like to thank the fellow panelists and the coordinators of this webinar and all the participants. It's been great to be in dialogue with you all. And for me, the final word is, you know, if it starts with the young people's interest in mind, it'll generally work out well. So I think the most we can focus on doing what we can to help our young people succeed and thrive. And if we do it in the way that we at PAL do it in partnership with law enforcement and law enforcement community, we can continue to be successful. So I wish everybody all the best.
So thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists today for your insights and your experiences and being so open with us. Couple last things to share. So like I said before, we do have an entire youth and law enforcement mentoring guide that was released earlier this year. It was created in partnership with a few different groups, namely OJADP, obviously National PAL, University of Chicago Urban Labs, and then EYE LEAD. And it provides some more background and context on police and youth relations, as well as an overview of mentoring programs that are doing this work and some best practices and case studies that you can check out for further learning. And then just please take that 3 to 4 minute survey, again, anonymous, to let us know how we did, what you'd like to see in the future, and things like that. And then again, all of this stuff, these slides, the recording, etc., resources will be posted in about a week or so. But again, thank you so much to everybody who joined today. We really appreciate you being here, learning with us, commenting, asking questions. And again, thank you to our panelists. Really appreciate your time. So yeah, that's it for us today, but hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and take care. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.